I'm sure I come off as very regimented in how I operate, but what one of the biggest things I've learned and I really started to understand towards the end of this year is life is quite meaningless without social interaction and being with other people. I think that's honestly the most important thing. I don't could give two shits if I make trillions of dollars and I'm one of the most powerful people on the planet, and it's meaningless without other people.
This is The Growth Moment with your coach, Amy Kay. Inspiration, ideas, and incredible insights for you to be more and do more. Get ready to grow today. This episode is titled Time Well Spent. It's a coaching session around balancing the rigid scheduling and discipline of driving ambition with more space for spontaneity, connection, and what makes the journey meaningful. This balancing act is a challenge that comes up with many of my type A high achiever leadership clients. A real push-pull. The client today happens to be my son, Matthew. He first came on the podcast 2 years ago in episode number 10, titled Stop Wasting Time. He was 15 then, in the thick of COVID, and going into his sophomore year of high school. That episode centered around Matt's angst around wasting time, the deep need to maximize every minute and how to best manage his time in order to achieve his lofty goals. I asked Matt to come back on the podcast to officially compare and contrast where he is now at 17 on the threshold of senior year and all those profound life decisions. It's always a gift to work with someone early in the game, much less my own child. We explore not so much what Matt wants to achieve, but more how he wants to go about it. This episode is for you if you ever struggle with balancing schedule and spontaneity. If you put pressure on yourself to be disciplined and measure value solely by what you produce. It's for you if you want to step back and ponder how you can feel more fulfilled, even joyful, as you climb your next mountain. So lean back and listen in. A few caveats. Matt and I do swear a bit. This is not a squeaky clean episode. And I might slide into mom mode here and there, although I do a pretty good job of keeping my coach hat on. We jump in after Matt describes that 2 years later, he still worries about wasting time and often feels an existential dread. I pose the question, what do you dread?
You can't expect yourself to live optimally at all hours of the day. There are going to be mistakes. There are going to be things that come up, but I think it's in the process, and there are best practices to organizing your time. So I would feel that I did a disservice to myself and to those around me if I didn't attempt to employ those best practices of living.
But what's the dread? What do you dread? Say it out loud. I dread blank.
I dread not living up to my full potential, or at least my realistic full potential.
So not just the crazy level of Matt potential, but
if there is a distribution of outcomes in my life where at the very right, I become a billionaire, raise a beautiful family, and to the left, there's I become homeless and end up overdosing on heroin. My existential dread is that I don't end up in that top 10% of outcomes, that I know that I'm capable.
So as close to the billionaire, beautiful family live.
Yes, I want to be higher on the distributional curve, so to speak. I think everyone, to a certain extent, thinks that way. I don't think that's just unique.
Yeah, they might use different metrics there. It might not be a billionaire. It might not, but I get you.
That's just a way to quantify it, right? Where I'm happy, I'm fulfilled, I've accomplished what I've accomplished, and ultimately I've made a net positive impact on the world around me. That is one of my larger goals as I step into college and later into the workforce, is I don't want to, as my dad says, become a smart and selfish person. I would rather be smart and give back and create positive change. around me.
So, Matt, one of the things I'm struck by is your beliefs of what will get you into that 10% sometimes seems very, like you said, rigid, pressured, just narrow road. Do you think it's that much of a tightrope, if you will?
No, no, no. I'm sure I come off as very regimented in how I operate. But what the one of the biggest things I've learned and I really started to understand towards the end of this year is life is quite meaningless without social interaction and being with other people. I think that's honestly the most important thing. I don't could give two shits if I make trillions of dollars and I'm one of the most powerful people on the planet, and it's meaningless without other people. There's a distinction to be made between positive social interactions and there's a distribution just as with outcomes in my life with how I spend my time with others. They're going to parties and just drinking and kind of not making any real connections with people is
There's
obviously
not a lot of depth or juice there for you. It's like, okay, that's social, but it's not what you're looking for.
yeah, that's in my opinion not as good of a use of my time as really having a one-on-one connection with my friends or really intentionally engaging in social interaction. I think that intentional engagement is ultimately the goal. Why I want to a little bit about me is right. One of my biggest goals is to become financially independent, and this is something that's changed from the last time I was on the podcast. Is that I imagine I would still continue working, but by the time I'm in my mid 30s and start a family, I would like to have the ability to step back from some of my larger responsibilities at work and to have enough passive income to sustain a decently comfortable lifestyle. And so the ultimate goal of that, and it's almost counterintuitive, but is to spend more time with my family once I reach that point. The reason I would push myself so hard now in high school and in my 20s is to get to that point of financial independence in my 30s so that I can spend the time with my family.
But I know you've been playing with that if you sacrifice too much and you kind of miss the point now completely, you were finding that not so satisfying.
Well, it's important that you stop and smell the roses and don't lose sight of what the ultimate goal is and in giving yourself the ability and the time to spend time with others and to be with others.
So, what caused you to play the board games last night?
Well, I was sitting next to you and I went through possible outcomes in my head and was like, all right, we can either sit and watch an episode of South Park and be mildly enjoyable, but I don't think that's necessarily the best use of time. And I saw the Jenga box and I thought almost spontaneously, why don't we just do this instead? And it turned out to be much, much better. Yeah.
It was great.
It was a good lesson. I think kind of one of those split second decisions where I was able to think about not only is watching TV with your family versus playing board games, what the difference in quality of time spent, but also how does that activity necessarily set you up for the rest of your night and what kind of mindset are you carrying forward?
Right. And so, what was the mindset that you exited the board game? Matt's dread is not living up to his realistic full potential, not reaching the top 10% of his possible outcomes. That dread has driven him for a fair number of years to push himself, hold ridiculously high expectations, and sacrifice some of the looser, lighter, loving side of life. The coaching creates space for reflection and awareness of emerging new ways of achieving and living. Matt talks about how he's realizing more and more that if he sacrifices too much, he risks missing the point of it all, having a net positive impact on the world, intentional and meaningful engagement with others, actual fulfillment. It's the classic risk of missing the forest for the trees, letting the means to an end take over and become the end. I'm curious, how are you achieving your life goals? Are you pushing so hard and expecting so much that you're missing the point? What are your means and what is the actual end goal? Matt is realizing that his real goal is not financial independence. That is a means to ultimately being able to enjoy and engage with his future family and friends. Human connection, family connection. So, in that board game moment, Matt decided to choose connection with his current family, me and his dad, right now. How many times have you postponed your ultimate desired end until you make or save X amount of money? You get the next promotion. Answer just one more email. It takes discernment to know when to drive forward or when to stop and smell the roses. Take a moment now to think about where you are in that balance. We jump back in as Matt describes how quality family connection helps create the right mindset for further achievement.
Well, often when we watch TV, I exit lethargic. I'm not as motivated. I don't feel as productive as I'm trying to get work done in the evening.
We might have laughed if it was a really good thing that we watched together, but it sets up that let's just keep doing, let's just keep watching.
Often the average South Park episode is, decent but not great, and there are definitely
And we've watched them all.
times that you don't feel that you could be doing something better. And so I think exiting with playing a board game, and there's much more genuine interaction and opportunities for discussion and enjoying each other versus bonding over you're consuming something versus engaging in something. I think that's the difference, the consumption versus engagement.
So, what I'm hearing, if this session is about ostensibly, you said before we got started, okay, this time management thing, yes, it was the central point 2 years ago, and it still is you being able to structure your time in a way that gets you to your goals. But what I'm hearing, the shift here is that it's not the old rigid time management. It's almost like stepping stones that bounce you forward and make it easier to engage and stay on the right track, but with some joy and fulfillment as opposed to along the way, as opposed to just discipline, discipline, discipline. So I don't know. Am I reading that right? That there's a little bit of a shift there?
I think that ultimately, if you give yourself an entire day in a vacuum, there tends to be what I would call goal creep, in that the more time you allot towards self-fulfillment, the more and more goals you try and accomplish. And some might view that as a good thing, but I think that there is a place for spontaneity. And part of the flaws with my previous kind of philosophy and system, where everything needs to be perfectly regimented and there's no room for spontaneity, ultimately I'm going to achieve this, like the backstops and the things that I need to accomplish that are imperative to my larger overarching goals, I will accomplish. I will always be able to make time and room for them. But if I'm just constantly filling up all of the empty space, I don't leave room for social interaction and spontaneous activities like playing board games or like going and getting lunch with friends. Where if I'm constantly focusing on, I need to do this in order to do this, in order to achieve this and get into this school and get this job, I might lose sight of the larger purpose.
Well, it's losing sight of the forest for the trees. Yeah. So you've got clues, it feels like, of how this new way of doing things can work that still has structure and good flow and discipline in the good sense, not the bad sense. What do you know today of the way that you need to expand and enhance a new way or a new structure for Matt that isn't that rigid, controlled, but isn't too loose? What could it look like? What about you? What is the structure you need to sustain drive and productivity while avoiding burnout? What's the next evolution of how you manage your time to get to your goals? What could it look like? Matt is finding that his previous philosophy and system, the perfectly regimented schedule with little room for spontaneity, no longer serves him. He's realizing that a more mindful schedule with true engagement might better fuel his success. An invaluable insight to have at 17. No matter your age and stage, I invite you to find a next level balance, ensuring meaning and fulfillment, creating those stepping stones that help you easily spring forward. Mindful effort, not mindless. The evolution of how you do life requires ongoing reflection and refinement. It's not a one and done. Pause the audio and jot down any ideas and inspiration for your balance and rhythm. We come back for a few last minutes with Matt as he describes what a new schedule and structure might look like.
Well, it's funny. I recently started, it's a bit ironic given the last 10 minutes of our conversation, but I started in my journal planning out every hour of my day in terms of what I want to accomplish. And I don't think there's been a single day so far where that schedule is worked out perfectly or that I've crossed off everything on the list.
But what does it give you? Is that a valuable exercise, even if it's not perfectly executed?
I think in part, yes, because it allows me to reflect and enumerate all of the things that I want to get done. But I've often found that in writing out 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., go for a run, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., workout, cardio, study for the SAT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And while I sometimes might block in time for spend time with or go to lunch with this person or dinner with the family, lunch with the family.
What if it wasn't blocked out?
I don't know. I think that I could fit everything in if I needed to. But I've found that even in planning everything out, it almost seems unsustainable because I need the social interaction. I crave, I don't know, crave's the right word, but being with other people is such an integral part of the human experience that your desire to accomplish everything you might write down on a list for yourself if you lived in a vacuum with no other people, like a monk on a mountaintop.
Right. That's what it is, Matt. It's not about real life.
You lose all of your motivation and your desire to improve yourself because you're alone. And I don't think that's not a healthy way. So ultimately, my point is that my productivity, if that's the ultimate thing I'm trying to optimize, will go down unless I account for social interaction and spontaneous activities. I think that's the big takeaway that I've had to come to grips with over these past 3 months.
Well, it's a hollow victory in a sense.
Exactly.
Of, I kept to my perfect schedule, but there's no joy. There's no fulfillment.
This happens to me every summer. I haven't talked to my friends. Oh, I did all this stuff and I achieved this goal I set for myself. And don't get me wrong, setting goals for yourself is an incredibly important process to go through.
Yeah, we can't throw that out, right?
At the expense of that, I didn't get to interact with my friends. And if the whole point of achieving that goal, getting a 1550 on the SAT, was just to get into a college so I can get a job that will give me the kind of connections and income I ultimately need to retire to then spend time with all of those friends that I lost touch with,
that you won't have by then,
then what the fuck are we doing?
And there will be no happy, beautiful family because you'll never have had time to date anyone.
I wouldn't have met a girl.
This is a big thing. So, of course, you are not the first to wrestle with what's the right balance? How do you create a good life? What's all, what's the play between discipline and spontaneity? It's funny, you asked me today for a copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. He talks about this shit. This is not new, what you're grappling with. It's all this.
Yeah, it's the cool thing about the Stoic philosophers is 90% of the problems they had then are still applicable today.
But Like every human before you and to come after, to a certain extent, you can take all the learning, you can read all the books, you can listen to all the podcasts, but you got to figure it out for yourself. You have to make it your own. So make it your own. It's up to you. You have to figure out what is integral to your human experience and how to create a structure, a schedule, a life worth living. Being able to truly claim my time is well spent. For Matt, it's about room for more spontaneity and social interaction, boosting productivity from fulfillment, not the other way around. Now, go and do this for yourself. Maybe you just need to drop a few things from your schedule or expand the time frame, loosen things up. Or maybe you need to keep pushing, but shift your downtime into more engaging, more mindful, less mindless consuming. Really look at your true goal and see how you might experience the heart of what you want now, not waiting for that far in the future endpoint. I want you to have incredible fulfillment and joy, no burnout, loads of sustainable momentum. And I always want to hear about your process and your progress. Remember that you can have your own growth moment, one-on-one private coaching, or join one of my coaching groups or workshops. To get the scoop, visit thegrowthmoment.com and do subscribe, follow on your favorite podcast app and my YouTube channel. Now get out there and grow today.